we need to talk. Recently, The Atlantic released this little tool that allowed you to search through LibGen, which is a database of books that includes allegedly a whole bunch of pirated books. And we know for a fact that Meta, in particular, this round of outrage, people have been really ragging on Meta, who used LibGen as part of the training for their AI models. To go through in this tool, and I'll link to it down below if you want to have a look at it, but if you just link for like your author name, if you've published books, there's a good chance you will find some books here that are yours. These are all mine. Some of these were not even published online. This Ends and Beginnings. This was a short story I was giving away for free on my email list. So these things get around. I never published that online at all. And then it's got a couple of my stories in here. It doesn't have all of them. And in fact, it looks like a lot of this was taken quite a while ago. So some of these, like year one, is unpublished now, has been for years. And it looks like it only has the first 5 of my 8-book Roots of Creation series. But other than that, like there's a lot of old stuff here. It doesn't have a lot of my newer stuff. But that said, they're here, right? They're in this data set. I know that they have been used to train these models. And there's been quite a lot of debate around this topic about whether this is okay or not. It certainly doesn't feel okay. Even myself, who am very pro AI on this channel, find it a little disconcerting to see all my books in there. But this has really done a good job highlighting, again, this question of whether or not using a book in a training data set is considered stealing, plagiarism, however you want to frame it. And before I get into my thoughts on that, I just have to give a huge shout out to Kevin McLaughlin. If you're unfamiliar with him, he's one of the admins of the AI Writing for Authors group. He's also very active in a lot of the other Facebook groups for authors out there, like 20 books and all of that. He wrote up a fantastic response to this that I used structurally in formatting this video. Everything that he said, I 100% agree with. So I consider this to be like both of us saying this, but I just want to give him credit where credit is due. If you're unfamiliar with the AI Writing for Authors Facebook group, it's a fantastic resource to learn more about all of this. But to put it simply, yes, Meta did use this training data set to train their AI models, as did OpenAI and Anthropic and Amazon and Apple and probably dozens of other companies throughout the world, many of which we have absolutely no jurisdiction over, like some of the models coming out of China. There are some of the best models in the world coming out right now, coming from China, and we have no control over that whatsoever. No matter what kind of legislation we want to pass here in the US, it's not really going to affect China. And admittedly, this is a little annoying, right? Like, it doesn't feel great to know that they just took my books without my permission and used them in this way. And yeah, I would love to be compensated for that, or at least have the option to opt out if I wanted. But for now, the way copyright infringement works is copyright prohibits the display or distribution of a work. It does not prohibit anything that does not fall under the display and distribution of a work. And even then, some display and distribution is considered okay in certain fair use cases, like putting a copyrighted image in an educational presentation for a school presentation or something like that. But from right now, based on everything I've heard from IP lawyers and attorneys out there, there is almost a universal legal consensus that using these copyrighted books and other materials to train an AI was and is completely legal. The exception would be if AI, one of the AI models, were to display the actual material that they were trained on to the end user, meaning us that are using the AI. If it could display that, then maybe there would be a case, but it would have to be substantial, meaning multiple pages worth. Just having a quote here and there would not cover it. And if you understand a little bit about how AI works, you'd understand that it's actually very nearly impossible to get it to reproduce entire chunks of text like that. It's just not how the AI thinks. And they don't actually have a database of books in their systems anywhere. Once the AI model has been trained, all of that just goes out the window, and the actual model can be only a couple gigabytes large whereas the training data set that we use to train it might be multiple terabytes large. So there isn't a actual database of stuff that they are accessing every time you use the AI. It's just used to teach the AI, and then it gets thrown out. Now, there was a case a couple years ago called the Thomson Reuters versus Ross case. And again, thank you to Kevin for helping me identify this, where basically all they did was take an AI model and rearrange the words of existing copyrighted material and then gave those results to the end user. So in that case, where all you're doing is taking copyrighted material and rearranging all of the things and then spitting it out in a slightly differently worded way, that is illegal, and that was reflected in the judgment. But thankfully, that is not really how most AI models work. And I think if any AI models did work that way, we would probably be able to figure it out with enough time. But the assumption that using copyrighted material was legal was just that. It was an assumption until October of 2023, when the first court case brought against these AI companies was thrown out. Since then, there have been at least 8 different cases in the US where the cases were either dismissed or they were found in favor of the defendants. There have been exactly 0 cases where the cases were found in the plaintiff's favor. That means that the plaintiffs bringing the case to the courts saying that this is infringement, etc., none of them won. There was one this past November that I thought was really telling, where it was dismissed by the judge because the judge said that the plaintiff was unable of proving any kind of concrete harm. And by concrete harm, meaning they're able to demonstrate identical or near identical output. And again, because of the way AI works, having identical or near identical output is just not something that it does. And basically, in all 8 cases that we know of so far, the end result was that the judge ruled that if the AI developers are not displaying or distributing copyrighted work to the end user in a significant way, especially, then it is not infringement. And honestly, rightly so, because that is what copyright infringement means: display, distribution. Now, I know this is going to be pretty frustrating to a lot of people, saying that it's just totally legal. I get a lot of people saying, well, it's totally legal now. Our laws weren't made for this. And that is true. But going through the legal system as it stands does not appear to be effective. So bringing lawsuits against these AI companies is not going to work. At least it hasn't over the last 8 or so cases that we've seen, all of which have been thrown out or found in favor of the defendant. So if you want to take action, here's what I would recommend you do. The best thing you can do is to write to your Congress representative if you're in the US or whatever country you're in, talk to the government representative of you and your region, and just ask for change in the copyright law. That is probably the only way that any such change is going to happen. Also, keep in mind, if any new laws like that are passed, that will not change the legality of what has already happened. So any current models that have been built on these data sets, they were legal when they were formed, which means they will be legal afterwards, and that cannot be undone. But what getting new copyright law in place would do is it prevents any future training of a model on copyrighted material, or at least without doing it without our permission and probably some kind of compensation. And while I'm not really holding my breath on this just because of the lobbying power of these big tech companies, I will say there's a much better chance doing it that way than trying to do it through the legal system by suing these companies. It wouldn't be a fast solution because government bureaucracy never is. And frankly, if there are other companies outside the US, like in China, that are able to do this anyway without the US's permission, then I honestly don't know if it would do much. People that use AI would likely go to those models because they would likely be slightly better than the US models. That puts the US at a competitive disadvantage, and the US government isn't going to like that. So there's all kinds of factors that we have to keep in mind here. I'm just saying that if you want to do anything, this is probably the most effective way to do it. But here's the thing. I don't actually worry too much about this fact. You've heard me reference a couple of times about how the AI works and why it's not able to produce massive quotations from text and display, pages on pages of someone's book. And there are a couple of reasons why I think this is. The first is that just how it's learning. So an AI, even though it learns faster than a human, it learns in the same way. It reads something and it kind of makes mathematical decisions and assumptions based on the words that it sees. It builds these probability models that say if the last word I said was peanut, then the next word has a certain percentage of being butter or allergy or something like that. And depending on the context, it might be more likely to be butter or more likely to be allergy. It is actually the same technology that you will find in your phone when you are texting and it gives you the auto predict of what word should come next. It's actually the same technology, but on a much smaller scale. And so all that's happening when you are training a model on a book is it is learning the mathematics of a sentence. And because of that, once it has trained on those things, it doesn't need to have them around anymore. You can just throw out the training data set. Much like how if you or I read a book, we will remember that book for some time afterward. We don't necessarily need to have it in our hands, somehow like download it into our brain all of the time. We learn from it, we read it, we move on. And that's exactly the same way that AI learns. The only difference is that AI can do this at a scale that humans cannot. And so I understand the people that say, well, it's not really like a human learns because it's so fast. But just conceptually, like the way it actually learns is actually very similar. All it's doing is creating a sort of probability model in its head about what word is most likely to come next based on the previous words and the prompt that it was given. Second reason why I don't worry too much is that there's this thing called synthetic data now. There are models that have been specifically trained to create more synthetic data. And it does this without really succumbing to the degradation theory that if a model is trained on more AI content, that it will degrade over time. That doesn't actually appear to be the case when done specifically. And I never knew it would, right? Like I knew that kind of a theoretical problem would probably be easily figured out by these really smart people in Silicon Valley. So these days, 90% or so of the training data going forward, especially for smaller models and smaller companies, is probably going to be synthetically created. Number three is that compensation has already begun to some case. We've already seen companies like OpenAI make deals with other companies, such as Reddit or, funny enough, The Atlantic and other news corporations to get their data. And we don't know the specifics of how much they pay, but we know that they're paying them something. They've made some kind of agreement. And there have been instances already of publishers working together with these companies and compensating the authors that they work with. And so we are seeing this happen already. And I think this is more for the AI companies to really cover their backs because even though it is completely legal, and that's important to keep in mind, it is completely legal to use these in the training data set because it is not display or distribution of it. Even though that is completely legal, I think a lot of these big AI companies just don't want to bother with the hate, like Adobe, for example, it only trains on their own stuff that they clearly have the legal right to work with. If you ask me, that has led to a slightly inferior product from Adobe, but it is possible. And so I think that a lot of these companies are going to start licensing these things out just so they don't have to worry about any lawsuits in the future. And the fourth reason why I don't worry about this too much is that there are more ethical forms of training. There's huge databases of clearly public domain or Creative Commons content. There's also quite a bit of content on platforms here like YouTube, where even though I am kind of the owner of my content, Google has the right to do a lot of things with the content that I produce. And the very agreement of me agreeing to put my content on their platform means basically Google can do whatever they want with it because it is their platform that I am using. And so they have access to a whole lot of content that way. Lastly, the fifth reason why I don't think this is a big deal is the fact that large language models are improving without the training data sets. The training data sets, for the most part, are not growing by leaps and bounds the way AI is, right? For instance, we received the OpenAI's model GPT-4 way back in, I believe it was March of 2024, so a little over a year ago. Since then, there have been many iterations of GPT-4. We've had GPT-4o, we've had GPT-4o mini, we had GPT 4.5. None of these have been, trained from the ground up. on these huge data sets, but they have been iterated and optimized, and they've really just fine-tuned this thing until the new models that we have today are so much better than the original GPT-4 model that we had. And so a lot of what happens with the AI technology is not so much what was it trained on, but how well does it learn from the things that it was trained on. So in theory, in the future, we could potentially have models that are trained on less and less, but actually get better and better. This is why so many of us say that like this genie is out of the bag. Like we cannot put it back in. Even if laws were to pass, it would be too late for that. So like my friend Kevin in his post about this, I agree that we should file this under things that we can't do much about and therefore shouldn't worry. I'd much rather be paid for someone to use my books in the training data set, obviously. I think anybody, even the most pro AI authors out there, would want that. Because, I mean, who wouldn't? But for now, that just isn't really an option from a legal standpoint. My advice, if you're really opposed to AI and being used in this way and using your copyrighted material in their data sets, is to channel that energy into something a little bit more productive. Start by reaching out to your government representatives, and then maybe you can try some other stuff. Maybe even try writing with these things. I guarantee you it's not what you think. I'm sure there is a part of the writing process that is really drudgery for you because writing is not one thing. It is a series of multiple different things. Find one that you don't like and figure out a way for AI to help you in that thing. Because by doing so, you will actually free up brain space and time to spend on the things that you like most. There's a quote from a guy named Alfred North Whitehead who said something like this: "Civilization advances by extending the number of important operations which we can perform without thinking of them." In other words, the more we can automate, the more we have time and brain space to devote to things that will actually advance the civilization. Most of the time when we get a new tool like AI, we think how we can make it do the things that we already do. But that's thinking in a very limited, like we have a ceiling kind of thinking. But what we need to understand is that there is no ceiling, okay? Once we use this to stand a little higher, we're going to be able to reach heights that we were never able to achieve before. And that's really the mindset we need to have here, is not how is AI going to replace me, but how can I use AI to do things that were never possible before this? And by the way, I would strongly recommend you, if you're opposed to AI, do not use the phrases AI is stealing or AI is plagiarizing, because those things are demonstratively false. We know that just from the legal outcomes that have come out. I understand if it feels like stealing, because it definitely can, but to use those words in your argument actually undermines your argument because you're clearly saying things that are false. Because unless the AI companies are displaying or distributing somebody else's work to the end user, they are not doing things illegally. They are not stealing. They are not plagiarizing. That's literally the definition of stealing and plagiarizing, is the display or distribution of these things. So unless you want to undermine your argument by saying something that is completely false, figure out a better way to say it, a better way to get your feelings across in a way that won't actually make you look less intelligent. And by the way, I'm not trying to harp on any of the people that are against AI here. I'm just trying to help you improve your arguments, because that particular argument is completely false. And there are better ways to make your point and try to actually get legal action done. So please do not degrade and undermine your own arguments by making statements that are clearly not true. I know this is kind of a difficult topic for a lot of people. I really want to help you guys. But we got to also make sure we're not ostriches burying our heads in the sand here. We've got to be able to do more proactive things rather than being reactive to these situations. Be proactive and go create something. I'm not necessarily saying create a book or an image with AI. I'm just saying go out and be creative. Anything can be a creative endeavor, from building a business to writing a book. So go out there and actually create something, add to the world, rather than just trying to tear down the things that you don't like. Hope that was useful for you, and I will see you in the next video.